Hi, and welcome back to Kohelet. We're holding chapter 2, verse 3. Tarti v'libi, limshach bayayin es besari, v'libi noheg b'chachma, v'lechos b'sichlus, ad asher ere izatov livnei ha'adam, asher yasu tachas hashamayim, mispar yemei chayehem. I explored in my heart to salve with wine my flesh, while my heart conducts with intelligence and to hold on to frivolity, until I see which is good for people to do under heaven during the numbered days of their lives. So since we've seen that if we focus purely on wisdom, or whether we focus purely on frivolity, each one alone as an absolute goal is not ultimately fulfilling and doesn't lead us to happiness and satisfaction. Let's try to hold on to both at the same time. Let's do both at the same time. Let's follow pleasure. Let's attempt to achieve pleasure. But let's do it while holding on to intelligence and wisdom and not losing sight of wisdom. And in that way, we won't have the negativity of either side. In other words, we won't let ourselves be led into purely empty pleasures and purely empty frivolity. And at the same time, the worldly pleasures will perhaps in some way ease the pain of our wisdom. So we'll follow both at the same time, and each one will enhance and reinforce the other, because we can use our wisdom and intelligence to enhance our pleasure, and we can use the pleasure to not let us get lost in intelligence and wisdom. So we're going to follow pleasure while not letting go of wisdom and intelligence. Note that the word tarti is an interesting word. The word tarti that the verse starts with can mean explore, the way I translated it when I read the translation. It can also mean wander, like velosa suru. And it also means two, double in Aramaic, which is an allusion to the fact that we're going to follow two paths at once here. We're going to follow both wisdom and pleasure at the same time. Verses 4 through 6, we're going to do all three at the same time. Higdalti masai, banisi li vatim, natati li kramim, asisi li ganos ufardesim, venatati vahem eitz kolperi, asisi li brechos mayim, lahashkos mayhem, yard someach eitz. I expanded my endeavors, built me homes, planted me vineyards, made me gardens and orchards, and planted in them trees of every fruit, made me pools of water to quench from them blooming forests of trees. Notice the me. Keeps on mentioning me. Everything I did for myself. Verses 7 and 8. Kanisi li avadim ushfachos, uvnei vayis hoyoli, gamik nabakar vatzon, harbe hoyoli, mikol shahoyu lefanai b'Yerushalayim. Kanasti li gam kesev ezav, v'skulas malachim b'hamdinos, asisi li sharim v'sharos, v'sanugos b'nei ha'adam, shida v'shidos. I purchased slaves and maids, and households I had, also flocks of cattle and sheep, more were to me than all that were before me in Jerusalem. I gathered for me also silver and gold, and treasures of kings and kingdoms. I made me singers and singstresses, and the pleasures of humanity, women and women. So the last words, shida v'shidos, can be translated a number of different ways. I used women, which is one of the translations. It can also be carriages, riding carriages. It can be cabinets, like curiosity cabinets that were popular in the Middle Ages. It can be translated as plumbing, jacuzzis. The point is, all manner of pleasures, ultimate pleasures, every pleasure imaginable. So why is there such a long list of pleasures? It extends to 6 verses. Everything else in Kohelet is very concise and written very formally and short. And here we go into a long list of pleasures. And of course, the answer is to make you feel it, right? So we're listing all the pleasures so that you can kind of partake in it and feel what it might have felt like. To us today, the list sounds a little bit anachronistic and old and poetic, not stuff that we would be engaged in today. But if this were written today, it would sound a little bit differently. It might be written something like, I made myself summer homes and winter homes, palaces and gardens, a chateau on the outskirts of Paris, and a villa in the hills of Tuscany, gardens, pools, waterfalls, and fountains, a garage with 30 cars of the latest make and model, a 300-foot yacht, and a private jet and 2 helicopters, parties with 1,200 people, and all manner of entertainment. Something like that. So something that we today would feel in touch with. And presumably people in those days would have felt these pleasures as they would be reading this. Pasuk Tes, verse 9. V'gedalti v'osafti mikol shahoyu lefanai b'Yerushalayim, af chachmasi amdali. And I became greater and increased, more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom stood by me. So we're going back to the point we started with. that were keeping the pleasures and the wisdom both at the same time. Also, my wisdom stood by me means both things, means two things. Number one, I kept my wisdom. Even though I followed the path of all these pleasures, I made certain not to lose sight of the wisdom and the intelligence at the same time and not to get completely lost in the pleasures. But also, my wisdom stood by me, my intelligence stood by me, meaning my intelligence helped me amass all these pleasures. I used my intelligence to follow up and to gather this long list of pleasures and indulgences and treasures. Verse 10. V'chol asher shalu einai lo atzalti mehem lo manati es libi mikol simcha ki libi sameach mikol amali v'zeh hayachalki mikol amali. And everything that my eyes asked for, everything that my eyes desired, everything that my eyes asked for, I did not withhold from them. I didn't hold back my heart from every happiness, but my heart was pleased, satisfied through all my efforts, and this was my portion from all my effort. So let's pause on a couple of points here. Number one, my heart was satisfied through all my effort. So there's two things here. Number one, my heart was satisfied through all my effort. In other words, I was able, because I followed both of these paths at once, I was able to amass better and greater and more pleasure because I used my intelligence to aid me in seeking pleasure. So now I got more pleasure. And also my heart was pleased with my endeavors and satisfied for my endeavors because in the first instance, when we followed only frivolity and pleasure in the moment alone, of course, that is instantly and almost immediately not satisfying after a very short time, because there's no effort, there's no goal, it's completely meaningless. Here, when we're seeking pleasure, even though we're seeking only material pleasure, but we're doing it through a series of goals, and we're doing it intentionally, and we're following up, and most importantly, we're expending effort towards it, and finally we achieve it, it of course is more satisfying than the first time. So these efforts satisfied my heart in terms of achieving the pleasure. And so the satisfaction was greater than the first time. But immediately he turns to and alludes to what's going to follow up in the coming verses. And this was my portion in all my efforts. In other words, this is the extent of what I had. So he's alluding to what's about to come next, that ultimately this wasn't satisfying either to a great extent. It was a little bit more satisfying than initially when we follow just empty frivolity purely in the momentary indulgence alone. Here, there was effort and a goal was expended and we were moving towards a goal. So even though it was material pleasure, there was some satisfaction in it, but it was limited. Ultimately, this was my portion. So there was some happiness and satisfaction, but it's kind of a little bit elusive too and not fully satisfying, as we'll see shortly. And so we're kind of hinting at that already at the end of this verse. And this was the extent of my satisfaction. I think we all intuitively know that pure fun and games is not really satisfying. If we focus just on frivolity and foolishness and fun in the moment, we all realize intuitively that that's not really going to make us happy. But even when we focus on worldly and material pleasures purely for their own sake, even if we expend effort and do it over time with a goal, it's somewhat more satisfying, but ultimately it's not fully and completely satisfying, and it still leaves some lacking and some worldly absurdity in it. And we'll follow up on that in the coming lectures on the next few verses next time we meet.